So I am Jacob Bilecki. Welcome to the 2018 Age Well Conference. I am a results manager with the Boulder County Area Agency on Aging.
Let me just bring this down a little bit. Hi, I'm Lindsay Parsons. I'm the Aging Policy Advocate and Planner with Boulder County Area Agency on Aging. I'm so happy to be here with you all today, including those of you who are visiting us via YouTube Live. Hello, Mom and Dad. So the inspiration for this conference comes from the Boulder County Age Well Strategic Plan. Our plan is intended to be a starting point for a collaborative, interactive, community-driven process which guides us over 4 years. The plan helps us better understand and address challenges and encourage solutions for a more age-friendly community. We are currently in the process of updating the strategic plan, and we invite all of you with an interest in aging in Boulder County to get involved. We have recently released a key informant survey that we ask all of you to take. You can visit allagewell.com to learn more.
So for those of you who have been to this conference in prior years, you'll notice that this is a new venue. And we would like to just point out a few things about the venue. First, the conference occupies 2 levels. So it's this ground level and then the floor above us. All the sessions will take place in this room, so the keynote will be all of us together, and then for the concurrent sessions, the walls will come out and we'll break out into three workshops. We have exhibitors here in the foyer, which I'm sure you've seen. We also have exhibitors on the catwalk upstairs, and we really encourage you to please visit with those exhibitors upstairs. There's also coffee and water up there. Where am I? We also have reserved a co-working room, which is upstairs in this corner here. And that's basically just a boardroom, conference room, if you want to work or you're getting sick of being around a lot of people, or you want to have a quieter space to eat lunch. Feel free to use that room. We have it reserved throughout the day, and it's just kind of open. We have lunch prepared for you at noon. We'll have it served right here in the middle of the foyer. We'll also have lunch served upstairs in the cafeteria. So there is a cafeteria eating area up there in that direction. Lunch will also be served up there. If it's going to warm up a little bit, there's also eating spaces just outside in this little pavilion in that direction. And there's also a cafe next door if you're in the mood for a little snack or whatever. You have to pay for it, but it's available there. And we would like to take a moment to also recognize everyone on the planning committee who's helped to bring this event together. That's Keith Hughes, Julie McKenzie, Andrea Papas-Merrill, Jackie Myers, Amy Payan Aldez, and Emily Wilson. And we'd also like to thank the many Area Agency on Aging staff and other volunteers, as well as NCAR-UCAR staff, who have helped make this event today run as smoothly as possible. And if we could just give them a hand, that'd be great. Thank you.
Tickets and sponsorships fund a majority of the cost of this event, and we wouldn't be able to attract the quality of speakers or the quantity of guests without the generous support of our track sponsors, AARP Colorado, Premier Mortgage Group, and Balfour Senior Living, as well as our partner sponsor, Boulder Medical Center. And now we're going to hear a little bit from Boulder Medical Center. We have Dr. Carolyn Franczak. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Dr. Carolyn Franczak, and I am a urologist at the Boulder Medical Center. And I just want to talk to everybody about why I love, and I mean I really do love working at the Boulder Medical Center, and why I love being a patient there. And it's because we are all about continuity of care for all adults, even in all generations. Boulder Medical Center, the key important part of that multi-specialty practice is that we are physician-owned and physician-operated. That is a rarity nowadays. Most clinics and care centers are owned by corporate America, or they're owned by a larger entity. The beauty of Boulder Medical Center is I get to make the decisions for your health care, and I know I'm speaking for all the other providers that are there. We make the decisions we feel are right for you and not what some entity might be telling us we should be doing. And that makes me a very happy doctor, and that makes you a very happy patient because your quality of care is high, and we really do track that and pay attention to that. We are 4 locations around Boulder County, and we are 80 providers, including specialists and generalists. We also have an urgent care that is open 7 days a week, and it's staffed by real MDs. So anytime on the weekend you need something, Boulder Medical Center is there, and that's downtown off of Broadway. Also, we have just recently hired 3 new primary care doctors, and one includes a geriatrician. Her name is Dr. Elise Reinhardt. She'll be starting in January. We've hired Helen Rowe. She's an internal medicine doctor at the Broadway Clinic, and also John Kelly. He's a new family medicine doctor, also at the Broadway Clinic. I'm a urologist. My practice is very busy. We've hired another urologist to serve because, as one of my patients said, 50% of women leak, and there's 2 types of men in this world. There's one that sees a urologist and one who will see a urologist. So we're very busy, and we want to take care of everybody. That's what I want to say. So if you aren't a patient at Boulder Medical Center, come. I would love to see you. I know we all would love to see you, and we really do care about you. So thank you again for letting us be part of this conference, and have a great day.
Thank you, Dr. Franzek. And thanks again to Boulder Medical Center for your support. I would now like to welcome Kelly Hudson, the president of the Aging Services Foundation of Boulder County. Kelly will announce the recipient of the 2018 Elderberry Award.
Thank you, Jacob, and welcome to everyone. I just want to share the mission of the Aging Services Foundation with you, as it really speaks to our mindset, what we like to do, what we strive to do. The Foundation's mission is to support and advance innovative solutions that encourage well-being, independence, and dignity for all of Boulder County's older adults and family caregivers. Our logo at the Foundation is the elderberry. It's a fruit symbolic of the elder, so named because of Native American, herbalists regarded it as the wise elder plant, thanks to its ability to promote health and vitality. Since 2003, the Aging Services Foundation has awarded the Elderberry Award, honoring unique and impactful programs, projects, groups, and individuals that contribute to a vibrant community in which all age well. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I am delighted today, so delighted, to present this year's Elderberry Award to someone who has been a huge supporter of the Foundation since its inception in 1999, served in many roles on the Foundation, and advocated for older adults throughout the county and the country for many years. Her work has been inspirational and aspirational to me and so many across our community. This year's recipient of the 2018 Elderberry Award is Sherry Leach. Sherry, if you would like to join me on stage, I'd like to read the inscription on her plaque because it is so fitting to the work that she has done for many years. Through your more than 2 decades of leadership, vision, and action, you have encouraged the Area Agency on Aging to be an innovative and forward-thinking organization. You have championed stronger networks of local service providers. You have built new mission-driven partnerships and collaborative relationships with local, regional, and national groups and organizations across sectors. And you have helped make Boulder County one of the most age-friendly communities in the United States. Again, let's thank Sherry for all of her work, and then we'll hear from her.
I want to thank the Aging Services Foundation for this Elderberry Award. It hardly seems fair to get recognition for doing something that you love to do. You know, I mean, I feel like that's kind of like extra gravy on the whole thing. And I have been so happy to have the opportunity to work with the foundation, and the fact that we have a foundation that works with us, because it's allowed us to be able to do a lot of extra things and be more innovative. So they're a great partner for us. So including my time as a graduate student intern, I've been with this agency, the Boulder County Area Agency on Aging, for 23 years. Since this was my second career, I don't think I ever thought I would be here that long, but the time went by pretty quickly. So not surprisingly, I've seen a lot of changes. Our office was originally a few rooms in a building across east of the courthouse. We then moved out to the North Broadway campus, and we now have staff in the hub in Longmont, and we also maintain our mountain office sites. One of my first tasks when I came on board was to work with National Research Center on a survey that was called The Health and Lifestyle of Older Adults. The Boulder County Public Health had given us the funds to do this and learn something about older adults, and so that was really a lot of fun to work on that research project. And for me, this has had nice symmetry, because as I end my time with Boulder County AAA, I had the privilege this year as serving as the project lead for a statewide CASOA survey, a Consumer Assessment Survey of Older Adults. That's what the acronym stands for. And that is research that was conducted in all 16 of the AAAs across Colorado. And again, it was done by, and I was working with, National Research Center. The agency that I joined in 1996 and the one that I leave in 2018 can fairly be described as one that is strengths-based, innovative, and responsive to changes in the larger federal and state environments. Oh, I think Jacob, I'm sorry, turned your sign off. I'll move my hand over here. That's responsive to the larger federal and state environments and the network of which we're part. One of our bigger challenges, along with the rapidly growing aging population, which everybody in this room is familiar with, has been the direction we received from the Federal Administration on Community Living, especially under the leadership of Assistant Secretary Kathy Greenlee. The AAA network was encouraged to step out of our comfort zone of service delivery that was based largely on a social service model and start to embrace a stronger working relationship with the health sector. The goal being that older adults are better served and benefited by both medical interventions and access to the social determinants of health, such as transportation, housing, and food. Along with this, Secretary Greenlee encouraged us to build up our business acumen. When we first heard that, I'll tell you, that was a step out of our comfort zone and our norm. But the reason for this was to bring in more resources, a role that our foundation helps play, so that we can provide services for this growing population and to be sustainable into the future. These efforts have created a lot of growth and expanding opportunities for our agency. I am so proud of the work that our staff does today in this AAA. The research and planning for a growing aging population, the oversight and compliance of the Older Americans Act and state funds for senior services, and our direct services of options counseling, case management, caregiver support, veteran services, dental assistance, short-term financial assistance, robust volunteer programs, including kind of our hallmark respite and companion volunteer program that provide comfort and breaks for so many people, our evidence-based health classes, including our diabetes prevention program, for which this week we just received recognition from the CDC, so we're quite excited about that. Our long-term care ombudsman, LGBT outreach, nutrition oversight and counseling, Falls Prevention Week, and a very timely one, our Medicare counseling. As you might imagine, I don't think our Medicare counselors are here today because they are very busy in Medicare open enrollment. So this is a very important time for them. And I have to say it's very timely for me as I'm preparing to retire at the end of the month, using their wisdom and advice as I look at choosing my Medicare Part B choices. I am extremely grateful for this staff, the AAA staff, and for our partners in local senior services, the Aging Advisory Council, the Aging Services Foundation, and this larger provider network that's really quite broad. Together, we really have worked to make Boulder County a place in which we can age well. To cite an oft-used phrase, it does take a village. Years ago, a member of our Aging Advisory Council gave me a card with a statement from writings from the Baha'i Faith. It hangs on my bulletin board and I look at it often. It says, "Work is worship." This reminds me daily of how blessed I have been to be able to have work that is also for me a call. It also provides a reminder and guideline about how we should conduct that work. Thank you, Aging Service Foundation, and everyone for this recognition. I so appreciate it.
I just wanted to say, Sherry, we wish you the very best and are excited about the new chapters that you're beginning to write.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Sherry. It is now my pleasure to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Marissa Gerstein-Pino. Bridging research interpretation, and applications units. Marissa is a researcher and senior associate with Washington, D.C.-based Frameworks Institute. A sociologist by training, Marissa has focused her research on gender and family, medicine, culture, and public policy. Prior to joining Frameworks, she served as a program officer with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, where she worked with panels of leading experts on a variety of topics. Marissa received her BA in sociology from New College of Florida and her MA and PhD in sociology from the University of California, Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming Marissa Gerstein-Pino. Are you all set up here?
I think we're gonna switch this and be okay, hopefully. Oh, we've jumped ahead a little bit. And this one, there we go, okay. Thank you for patience with my technology problems. Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you everybody for being here and for the Boulder County. I'm glad I get to call you AAA because I knew I was gonna mess up that full name. So that's really exciting to hear. So as Lindsay mentioned, I am from the Frameworks Institute, which is based in Washington, D.C., and I'm going to be presenting the results of a big research project that we did and completed. Oh boy, I guess it's about 2 years ago now, on reframing aging. How can we talk about aging in more productive ways so that people really understand aging in much more positive ways, and also support programs and policies that can help all of us collectively age well. So I'm going to be showing you a lot of results from that research, including a lot of video that I hope is really fun, assuming the technology works with me. So let's jump in. So frameworks, a little bit of background on us. We're a little different from other communications organizations in that we're almost entirely social science PhDs. So you can see behind me, we draw from a wide variety of disciplines, anthropologists, psychologists. I am a sociologist, as Lindsay mentioned. I work with a lot of linguists. I actually didn't know there were this many linguists in the world until I started working at Frameworks. But also folks from advocacy and public health. So we're really a very multidisciplinary group. And as you can probably tell from our name, we are into framing. So what is a frame? This is a word that I feel like has really had a lot of cachet lately. You see it more and more in the media, and you hear politicians talking about it, but it's not always clearly defined. So the way we think about frames is as sets of choices about how you present information. So they're what you emphasize, they're how you explain things, they're what you say, and also what you leave unsaid. And so I would argue that anytime you're presenting information, you're framing, even if you're leaving out a frame, because you're letting people create their own frames. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how that works. And I'm sorry if I'm talking quickly, but I want to get to all the videos. So, but I'm going to just start off with talking a little bit, now that we know what a frame is, why is it so important for all of us? The first reason it's important is that understanding is frame dependent. So there's a lot of research that shows that the way we understand the world around us and different social issues like aging is dependent on the frame, the way it's framed when the information is presented. So this is actually an example from some work, not on aging, but some work that we did on addiction a number of years ago now that gave us some really interesting results. So what happened is a group of advocates and a foundation and experts in the province of Alberta, Canada, came to us and said, we have been trying to get Albertans to support evidence-based addiction policies for years, and nothing is happening. And we know there's something wrong with how we're communicating about it. Could you please help us figure out what we're doing wrong and how we can do it better? So as part of a big research project that we did in Alberta, we ran a large-scale experimental survey. It was a demographically representative survey with about 6,000 Albertans. There are more than 6,000 people living in Alberta, as it turns out. And what we did is we ran an experiment where we separated people into 4 groups. So one group got the value that you see there of interdependence. So they were given a message that was something like, as Albertans, we all depend on one another. We're only as strong as our weakest member. And so, we need to work together and help each other and support evidence-based addiction policies. The second group got the ingenuity value that you see up there. And that value is, as Albertans, we're innovative people. We know how to tackle hard solutions together. And hard problems together. This is a problem that we can use innovation to really tackle as well. And then the last value was empathy. So this is probably a value you're aware of. There's a lot of talk about empathy these days, which is the idea that, we need to have sympathy for people with addiction. It's our mothers, our brothers, our sisters. We need to understand what they're going through, and that's why we should support these addiction policies. And then the black line represents the control group. So that group of people got nothing. They didn't get a message. They just went straight to asking the questions about their support. So this is what the results were. So you'll see that, this slide for me, the interdependence value actually increased people's support for evidence-based addiction policies by a significant degree. It really made people more supportive. The ingenuity value also made people more supportive, but not quite to the same degree. What was fascinating for us and pretty disappointing to the advocates we were talking to was that the empathy value depressed people's support for those same policies, which does not mean Albertans have no empathy. It just means that when you use that particular frame around when talking about addiction, it doesn't do what you're expecting it to do. And what was particularly disappointing for the people we're working with is that 90% of their communications were using that empathy value to try and raise support. So they were actually kind of shooting themselves in the foot. So again, understanding is frame dependent. And also, what I love about this graph is it shows how important it is to test your frames empirically before you run with them, right? Sometimes the things that make sense to us in our own heads as advocates, as experts, as people who care about an issue, with people who don't know about the issue, it doesn't work the same way. So the second reason that frames are important is that we know they can shift people's thinking in multiple ways. And I'm going to show you some evidence of this around aging later on. But first of all, they can help change people's understanding. They can really increase people's knowledge about a particular social issue or problem. They can change people's attitudes from fairly negative to very positive, sometimes very negative to much more positive. I'll show you evidence of that too. And we know that when people understand a social issue better and have a better attitude towards it, they are more likely to support effective policies, just like we saw in that last graph. Another reason that framing is important, and I think that this is one that might be particularly interesting for this group, is that framing can divide or unify movements. So a lot of times, particularly we're talking about a larger social issue where there's lots of different aspects to it, and then there's lots of different groups that are coming at it at the same time. There's lots and lots of different messages and lots of frames. And I think traditionally we've thought that, well, as long as people are getting more and more and more information from these different sectors, the public is going to understand things better and it's all going to work out in our favor. But what we know from cognitive science and social science research is that when you have all these different messages going out there, what happens is public understanding just disappears. People get overloaded, right? They're not sure what to think. And sometimes when they get too many different messages, they actually just tune you out because it's too much. So instead, you can use one frame or a group of frames to really not only increase public understanding, but to build a movement around the issue that you're interested in. So if you can find an effectively framed core story, like we did with aging, that's really sticky, that people can remember, and that all these different organizations and individuals and people who are interested in this particular issue can all use that same core story, it can really change public understanding. Because the thing about framing is that it works best in high doses. So having as many people using the same frames at the same time, that's the best way to do it. And then you're communicating with each other, right? So coming together around a shared frame can be a really, really effective way to connect different organizations. So that's one of the things that we're working on right now in the aging community. So now I'm going to get into some of the heart of what we're doing, of what we do. So the fourth reason, and this is why we've done this work on aging, is that frames can help address a problem. And we call this the you say, they think problem. So what happens is experts, advocates come to us, or go to the public, and say one thing, and then the public comes back and says something totally different or doesn't seem to understand what they're saying at all. So you're saying, they're thinking, and I'm going to show you an example of this, specifically on aging from some research we did. So you're maybe going out and saying something like, our nation's aging population is an untapped resource that could be contributing to all of our communities. And what the public says in response or seems to hear is something like this, and hopefully this you can hear this.
There are advantages to being older. You get to relax more. Yeah.
Retirement?
Because that's when work comes to an end.
Can you think of any advantages to getting older in America?
Not really.
Probably it would be hard for them to adapt to this newer world or new technology and things like that.
Technology-wise, I'm sure it's harder.
Doors seem to be closing a bit as far as opportunities.
I guess as you get older, they want someone who's going to be more vibrant, going to be around, maybe be able to do the work quicker, faster, better.
So what were the things that we heard there, right? So definitely not older people are an untapped resource. It's that they get to just go into retirement and sort of leave you all behind, right? Getting older is not a fun process. And really nobody even wants you in the workforce anyway because you have no digital literacy, you don't know how to use a computer, whatever. So that is not what was trying to be conveyed by the experts and advocates. So what's going on there? Why do we have this divide between what you're trying to say and what the public is hearing and thinking? So I think traditionally communications research and communications strategies have come out of this assumption that when people don't know anything about your issue, they're like an empty fishbowl. Like there's nothing there, right? So you can just drop your message in, it's gonna swim around like a little fish, it's gonna be happy, everybody's gonna understand everything perfectly. But what we know from social science is that this is not how human cognition works. This isn't how our minds work. Instead of like a fishbowl, our minds are more like swamps. Swamp has taken on a very different connotation the past 2 years, and I live in Washington, D.C., so I'm totally aware of that. But I can't let go of this metaphor because it's such a great description of how our minds actually are. Our minds are very complex ecosystems, just like a swamp is. So there are, dangerous things in swamps. There are alligators that can swim up and eat your message, but there's also fertile soil in swamps. There's orchids that grow in swamps. So the important thing is understanding that there is a swamp, that people come to your messages with all these different things, and that there's good things there and there's bad things there, right? And so we need to figure out what is there and then how we navigate the swamp. So specifically, the things that are in the swamp are what we call cultural models. So these are these kind of cognitive shortcuts. They're these ways of when we see something, we can make sense of it very quickly and understand what it is. And they're taken for granted. They're usually pretty automatic, although some of them are a little buried a little bit deeper, but we have to do more work to actually bring those models to the fore. They're things that develop out of our own experience and out of being embedded in our culture as we're socialized. I use the word socialized, sorry, that's sociologist talk, I apologize. So let's look at the swamp of aging. So this is what we put these together based on long 2-hour, very deep conversations, interviews with members of the American public across the country, where we really led people through how they think about getting older and how they think about aging. And from that, we pulled out, by comparing all these different interviews, the models that were really prominent, that came up again and again and again. I'm not going to go super into detail. I know there's a lot going on here, and I'm going to show you some illustrations of this. But I want to highlight that, first of all, there's a really strong pattern of thinking, this ideal versus real. So everybody hopes that when they get older, people are wiser, that they're going to be able to retire and have a good life. But the reality is your body falls apart, you're dependent on other people, you have no control. There's a very, very strong us versus them way of thinking about older people, right? So baby boomers or older people in general are a separate group from those of us who are in younger generations. They're taking our resources. Their interests don't align with ours, and I think I'm going to show you some examples of this, but this is something that's just magnified in the media, right? So it's really us against them in a lot of ways. But also there are a couple of places where there's very little understanding, and we're always interested to see what we call black boxes, because those are places where we can fill in information. So I think the one that's most important for us right this minute is ageism. So people really don't have a good sense of what ageism is. And when you say that word to members of the public, they're just not sure. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that's problematic, but what we can do to remedy that situation. So Lindsay said I should ask you all to forgive me for showing you something political. But I am from DC, so just bear with me. But so this is an ad. I don't know if any of you saw this on Facebook or anything, but it came out a few weeks ago. It's about the upcoming election. It's very funny. It is also, I believe, very pernicious in terms of the way it sets up that us versus them thinking. So I'm just going to show it to you and enjoy.
Dear young people,
don't vote.
Don't vote.
Everything's fine the way it is.
Trump, that was us.
He's our guy.
Tax cuts for the rich? Hell yeah. I'm rich as
Climate change? That's a you problem. I'll be dead soon.
Sure, school shootings are sad. But I haven't been in a school for 50 years.
I can't keep track of which lives matter.
Sure you don't like it. So, you'll like some meme on Instagram.
If the weather is nice, maybe you could go to one of those little marches.
You might even share this video on Facebook.
But you won't vote.
You young people never do.
But I do. I do.
I do. Midterms, primaries.
Every single election.
We'll be there, but you won't.
Because we're a generation of doers.
Not whiners.
And we're doing great.
Yeah, so I laughed just as hard as you did when I first saw this. Also, I wasn't sure if I should beep the swear word or not, but I figured, okay, I'll go ahead and do that. But it is, I mean, that was like one of the swampiest things I've ever seen in my life, right? Like just, it's us against them. They're taking everything. They don't care about younger people. I haven't been in a school in 50 years. I mean, it plays into that whole narrative that we see all the time that makes it really hard for people to understand, you know, first of all, that all of us are going to age, and that collectively we all benefit when people age well, and that really we're all in this together. It's such a divide and conquer sort of way of approaching things, and we see this so often. So, you know, will the reverse psychology in this video work? I don't know, but it's good for a laugh, but I think not good for us overall. So how do we get out of that dynamic, what we just saw? How do we, you know, we know people think this way. We know that the media is reinforcing a lot of this thinking, and even well-intentioned advocates are sometimes reinforcing this thinking. How do we move on? Well, a group of organizations called Grant Makers in Aging came to us a few years ago and said, we know we need to push the ball forward. You know, talking about aging in the way that we have hasn't been particularly effective. Let's do a full-on reframing project. And this is really exciting for us because when we have so many different grant makers coming together, it gives us a really great chance to spread our new frames out into the field through their networks and through their funding. So we're really excited about this project and where it's been going. So we, as you can see, we did a lot of research. I'm not going to get into absolutely all of this, but we did go through both a descriptive and prescriptive research phase where we tested a lot of tools. This was about a 2-year project overall, and I'm going to show you the result of some of these different pieces. I already showed you the result of the cognitive interviews, which was what was in that swamp. So what we took away from all of that research we did was 4 key findings. The first is that names matter. So this was actually one of the first pieces that we did because we're really interested to see which words seem to be most effective at helping people communicate about aging without setting up us versus them thinking or thinking about aging just being a period of deterioration. So we did this through a survey experiment, and we used a number of different names that we tested. And the first thing that we found is that when we exposed people to these names and then asked about the level of competency they thought someone with that designation had, we found that older adult or older person worked best. You will see here, and actually in the next part, that the word elder was at the farthest end. And we've actually, since we've been teaching and talking about a lot of this, we have gotten a little pushback on the word elder. It does mean different things in different communities, right? So in the LDS church, in Native American communities, other communities, elder is a sign of respect. So I don't want to say that elder or the word senior are words that you should never again use. Of course you should use them, and for certain communities I think they might be more effective. Amongst the general US public, they can potentially trigger some problematic thinking. So if you think about I'm going to show you the rest of our reframing strategy, but if you think about reframing as a strategy and not just, if I use this one word, I'm going to change everybody's minds, it's going to make more sense about how you strategically use words in your communications. So the other finding was that older person, older adult also made people think of sort of they pushed them towards the younger end of the spectrum. We decided based on that research that using older person was better generally when you can use it, because older adult actually pushes people too young. It makes them think of somebody who isn't actually 60 or 65 yet. So again, these are all words you can use. Older person is maybe a word that you want to use most liberally in your communications. Next finding. Let me just go back for a second. So oftentimes we find in the research on various projects we're doing that the common way that people communicate is to try and get people worried. They use crisis messaging. And definitely in the aging sphere, crisis messaging is something that happens and can be really problematic. So just to show you one particular example of many thousands, this is some information about the cost of aging in America. And as you can see, it's talking about how there's going to be so many seniors and it's going to cost us so much money. And it's going to strain Social Security, which is one of the things we found in the swamp. People assume Social Security is doomed. And if they think it's doomed, they think there's nothing we can do to save it or fix it or preserve it. And that's not where we want to go, right? We want people to think about solutions. So this just keeps going. I'll kind of scroll through it a little bit. It's just all of this data that's all about why we're all doomed. Oop, that just flipped. And what we know is that when you use crisis framing like that, when you use gray tsunami language, when you use we're about to all go downhill economically, because how are we going to care for all of the people who are getting older, people get really fatalistic. They think nothing can be done, and they check out, right? So if you think nothing's going to be done, why would you do anything? So instead, we really want to, one of our key findings, particularly for this project, is always talk about what the possibilities and the opportunities are when you're talking about aging. I think showing people data is important. Don't ever say, Marissa told me not to ever show any data about Social Security. It's how you frame it, right? How you talk about what Social Security is, how we can fix it, why it's good for all of us if we fix it. So talking about possibilities. So as you saw, I showed you earlier, there was that cognitive hole, that black hole around ageism. People just aren't sure what it is, and this is a great opportunity to educate the public. So since ageism is not really recognized as a problem for various reasons. So the common assumptions, well, first of all, people are like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. They also tend to think that, okay, maybe it's a problem, but racism is way bigger of a problem, or, misogyny is a bigger problem. Ageism isn't something we hear about. It gets kind of crowded out by all the other isms, I think, a lot of times. They don't think that it's something we can address with policy, and that it's essentially impossible to address. So how do we get people over that hump of not recognizing it as a problem? We found in our research that explaining ageism in a concrete, concise way was a really great way to get people to support solutions to ageism. So first of all, defining it. You can't assume that people know what it is, as we saw. Following it up with a really concrete example. So we tested a couple different examples, actually, with members of the public. We found the workplace example was the most it kind of caught people the quickest. They could really think about, oh yeah, when I get older, somebody I know gets older, in the workplace, it can become problematic. You get dismissed, somebody won't hire you if your resume says you're a certain age, et cetera. That was something that once you got into the explanation, people could grab onto that. And the last thing is talking about implicit bias. So everybody knows what implicit bias is, right? Or no? Does anybody? Huh? Assume not. Okay. So implicit bias is actually, it's in some ways similar to cultural models in terms of their sort of decisions that we make about categories of people the second that we see them. So, you assign certain attributes to a person of color or a person who's a certain age the moment you see them. And it's so automatic that it can actually be very, very hard to combat. I'm going to show you in a minute how our aging research actually does help combat that. But I would encourage everybody after this conference to go on Harvard's website. They have a Harvard implicit bias project, and you can do your own implicit bias test about age and various other categories. And it is amazing. You can't fake it. You can't play it. It's like this very rapid, and it's fascinating. But as you noted, most people don't know what implicit bias is, right? So even though all of us have it, so telling people what that is really critical as well. And I'm going to get sort of into the heart of our narrative finding and that sort of telling the new story part. So I think, traditionally for a lot of certainly organizations and fields around social issues, we've assumed that any story works, or certainly the stories we tell ourselves work, right? We're deep in it, we understand how it works, we can tell the story that makes sense to us. But we know from the research that we do and from social science research generally that actually the type of story you tell is really important. And we need to know ahead of time what that story does in order to make sure it's doing what we want it to do. So I'm going to break down the story that we recommend. So we call this the embracing the dynamic narrative. So it's a way of talking about aging, that sets up why does it matter, how does it work, and then what are the solutions that we can adopt. So instead of being maybe a snippet about one individual, it's a broader contextual story. We call it widening the lens, pulling back and really showing people what this issue is all about, why it matters, why it is a collective responsibility, and we're going to collectively benefit when everybody ages well. So I'm going to break down each of these for you. So you remember ingenuity from the slide earlier. It turns out it works with us as well as Albertans, although on a different topic. So again, it's that idea that Americans are resourceful. We know how to find innovative solutions to things. And what this does is it gets people out of that sort of us versus them and also very fatalistic way of thinking about aging, and makes people feel like, okay, this is an important thing for all of us, not just people who are getting older right now. And we can do this. Like building that sense of efficacy and collective agency is really critical whenever you're trying to really make change on any social issue. So that's the value that we recommend that you start with. So when you're writing your communication, think about how you can start by saying, we're innovative people and we know how to make it, create a situation or create programs or policies where all of us can age well in this country and we can do it together. So the metaphor that we recommend, and I'm going to show you some direct results of some direct data about this metaphor where you get to see people using it, which is really fun, is the idea of building momentum. So the story that we're telling with this is, how does this work? How does aging work? So as we get older, we gather momentum, we're accumulating wisdom, new ideas, and this energy powers up our society. So that again redirects away from that us versus them. It redirects from that aging deterioration cultural model, which is very, very top of mind for people, and helps people think of aging both as an opportunity and as something that we can come up with ways of making it an opportunity. There are programs and policies that can help, and we're all going to benefit. So you see, like with the Ingenuity Valley, now the metaphor, we're constantly through this narrative re-emphasizing the collectivity, right? So I am going to show some video where you're going to actually get to see, and I was one of the researchers on this part of the research, you're going to get to see members of the public, just everyday people, use that building momentum metaphor in some really creative ways in dialogue with each other. So I think it's fun. Okay, so.
What does it mean to get older?
And you're continually growing momentum.
You gain more energy for things, you gain wisdom, you can pass it down as a mentor.
Life is always moving.
The energy that's built up through the wisdom, the experience that we get.
An energy of accomplishment, of knowing.
There's so much energy there, there's so much passion.
What are the implications for society? Like, what should we be thinking about?
You keep contributing not only to your own life and to your family's life, but to your community's life.
As we grow older, we have a lot more experience and we get more comfortable with ourselves.
As you get older, you could still take up a new idea. You could still be a part of society and making positive change.
So that was an example of groups of people who had never heard about aging being a dynamic process where you build momentum. They came in with the same swampy cultural models as anybody else, and we taught them the metaphor, and they could use it really well. And not only use it, but they were actually teaching it to one another. So I think that, when I showed you the meta movement building slide, and I talked about metaphors being sticky, this is a really sticky metaphor. And also, I don't remember if it was in the video or not, but people would go like this, which when you see hand gestures, you're like, yes! They've got the metaphor. So I was very excited when this happened. Okay. What was even better about it being sticky, or maybe just as good, is that it reduced age-related bias. So as part of our survey experiment, that implicit bias test I told you about, where so people are shown images and then they're shown words, and you press different buttons. And then it's a way of measuring how you associate negative or positive words with pictures of different age groups. So that's what we did in this survey experiment. And before we did it, there was a control group, so people who got no message about aging, and then there are people who got the building momentum metaphor, and then we asked them a series of questions, and then about their we didn't ask them questions, we had them do the test. And what we found was that building momentum actually reduced implicit bias against older people by almost a third, which was a huge finding for us. And actually we have this, this research being published now in an academic journal, because it's a really impressive finding, I think, because it's very hard to reduce implicit bias. So I'm going to show you that sort of reduction in implicit bias in action. This is some other research that we did where you're going to see somebody talking about aging before they were exposed to the metaphor and then after.
What comes to mind when you think about getting older?
Trying not to get bummed out by other people that are old. I don't want to succumb to any mindset of old, because I see they talk about their ailments a lot. They talk about money problems. I love that because everybody contributes no matter how old they are. They need more opportunities because they can still have really good sharpened skills that they've always had. Because ideas can come to anybody, you know what I mean? You can be 80 years old and get a really good idea.
So you saw like that implicit bias that she had. She thought about older people and it was like, she literally went like this. And then afterwards she's smiling and is positive and is really like, yeah, this is something where people can provide a lot to our society and they're great opportunities. So that's the sort of thing you want to see a metaphor doing for people. So I was excited about that. So then the last part of that narrative, you saw the value, why is this important? Building momentum is how does this work? and then always offering solutions. And I think a lot of times when we're creating communications, we forget the solutions part. But people get hungry for solutions, especially when they understand how something works. And if you don't give them solutions, they'll end up going back to their swamp and either getting fatalistic or being like, oh, you know, it's not providing better programs for people who are getting older, it's everybody should save for retirement. So you want to make sure that you offer solutions that have, you know, each of these 5 C's. So one is that they're as specific as you can make them. They're collective, so these are systemic solutions where we all share, we all benefit. They show something of the process, you know, that you don't want to offer a solution that doesn't connect to the explanation you just offered. You want it to be part of that narrative, feasible, obviously, and also credible. You know, it can, sometimes people will interpret a solution as, well, what are you getting out of it? So generally, if you've offered this narrative and shown people what the collective benefits are, that's not going to happen, but you do want to think about the credibility. And so I'm going to show you one last video, and it's going to show you that sort of hunger for solutions type thinking. We didn't necessarily, at this point in the video, we hadn't given people the specific solutions yet, but they're almost there. They're ready for you to give them the solutions. Are there things that you think we could do as communities that can make this a more dynamic process?
I think valuing everybody and what everyone could contribute and bring to a process.
More mixture of ideas and just not like siloed age populations.
They're kind of siloed off into, you know, these different generations.
Everyone has a role, and it's to be appreciated.
Community-based opportunities for older people to kind of lead classes or teach people a skill.
Sometimes the older folks have a wealth of experience.
It's just kind of made me feel better about getting older.
So that was my last video. I'm just going to end with this quote, which I really love, by Richard Rorty, about how if we speak differently rather than just arguing well, I think we can particularly see that these days. The chief is the chief instrument of cultural change. And so I hope that all of the framing advice I showed you, you know, will help you speak a little bit differently about aging in really productive ways that help the entire community in Boulder, and certainly help gain support for the services and resources that you all are providing. So I think I actually ended a little early, which is amazing. I could have shown so much more video. All right, but thank you all very much. And I think we're going to take questions.
We're good. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can, there's a...
The one right there. Oh.
Hi. This presentation is better than Lakoff. Is there any chance we can get access to it?
So I can create a PDF version. It won't have the videos, and give it to Jacob. And also, all of you see our website and everything up there. We own all of our intellectual property from the work that we do. So we put everything that we create on our website. So there's toolkits, there's reports, there's all sorts of fun stuff up there as well.
So you are frameworks.
Yeah, so we're frameworksinstitute.org. It's like the longest name ever, but yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
I think it would be interesting to have a campaign aimed at youth that talks about how will you develop yourself so that as you grow older, you're continuing to contribute more and more. Because I don't think we think about, I mean, I think about it working in senior living all the time. How can I develop and create who I am in such a way that when I am 80 or 90, that I still have planned out a way that I can contribute?
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And I think you could put together The research that we've done, which is, we do research with people who are 18 and over. So I'm not sure how you'd talk necessarily to like very young children about this stuff, but putting this together with research that we're doing on adolescents and opportunity youth, to kind of think about how aging could be put together with their more immediate goals would be a really great idea. Yeah, and we do have a lot of that research on our website.
So in the beginning, when you were talking about the addiction study, the interdependent ingenuity and empathy,
yeah,
would you also say that those three approaches hold true for other topics? Like, is that a general rule of thumb?
No. So we tested a number of different values. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, for aging, and ingenuity just won. It was by far the best in terms of moving members of the public's interest, understanding attitudes towards and interest in effective policies around aging. For different topics, we test different values. So I would say generally, I shy away from empathy for almost any social issue. I don't think it's particularly effective, but that's my personal opinion. I think definitely whenever you're talking about populations or social issues that are highly stigmatized, empathy does not work very well, because all it does is focus on individual faults instead of helping people see a wider, broader pattern of sort of systemic situations in which people end up in those situations, if that makes sense.
I really appreciate your conversation with us today.
Oh, thanks.
I'm curious if in your work you consider the issue of the implicit bias or of economics, of finance, that someone's worth is connected with what they make. I think it's an implicit bias that's very strong in our society. I think it's one that might be able to be improved on, but I'm just curious if that's part of.
So you mean like a social class implicit bias?
Senior, and you say, well, they're not earning an income any longer.
Yeah, I see.
Their value is not as great as it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of that sort of zero-sum thinking, right? So thinking of older people as not contributing but as takers. And I think that is part of the implicit bias that we see, although it's hard with the way you test implicit bias. It's a little, I'm not sure if the word value is part of it. I'll have to look it up. But I think that it is generally one of the negative stereotypes that people have about older people. Although then there's a counter-cultural model, which is that older people are wealthy and that's how they're taking away money, right? So I should have emphasized this on the swamps slide, but you saw that with the ideal versus real. People often have very conflicting ways of thinking about a particular social topic. So they will tell you one thing and then literally the next sentence tell you the exact opposite, and they believe both of those things. And so we just have to, we roll with the punches with this. We know that the mind is not logical, but sometimes it's hard when you're thinking about how do I craft a message that I want to appeal to people's logic, but people are not logical. So
I'm thinking, and this may be too specific, but I think about advertising services for older adults, and just, you know, it does kind of tug on the empathy side. And how can we frame better that service? You need to, in your ad, clarify what your service is, but frame it in such a way that people don't say, man, I don't want to get older. Look at what happens.
So I guess it depends to some degree what the service is, but I think that generally you can create advertising around a service that definitely does address a certain population and maybe a certain kind of problem or need within a population. and you can frame it in a very positive way. So instead of focusing on people need this service because this sad situation, you can focus on how the service makes their situation a really much better one. So it's a tone. Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I haven't tested that, but the tone of that, so there's a number of different frames. So I showed you values, I showed you explanation, I showed you metaphors, and solutions, and I showed you a narrative arc with solutions. So those are some of the frames. There's other ones. So one is tone, which is what that is doing. Is it making it a sort of sad situation where you need depends, or hey, I can do all the things I want to do in my life now because I have this great thing. I mean, we don't focus on actual products, but I would say the tone of that is very different. And then messengers is the other one, right? Like who are the people who are actually, selling your message or speaking your message. For this particular project, we didn't test messengers, but that's another thing that you can think about. And I think in the ARP had a whole advertising campaign where they had younger people and older people dancing together. Your dancing is reminding me, and now I can't remember what the name of the campaign was, but it was interesting because it had, and if I find it, I'll send it to Jacob. It did have both younger and older people as the messengers together, which was a different way of framing aging. And I think that kind of goes to what you were talking about as well, about youth. So, yeah.
Just had something down the street here in Boulder on Halloween night of older people and some younger or middle-aged people dancing together at the Avalon Dance Hall. So I think
cool.
That's one example.
Uh-huh.
So I think for me, one of the things to focus on is that retirement, for example, can be a really interesting time for the individual and a productive time for society. You can be a Peace Corps volunteer. You can be a volunteer in nonprofits, doing really productive things for people here in this country and in other countries. So I think to kind of help bridge that view of older people are just kind of, taking our money and sitting around criticizing things or whining or something, excuse me, so that younger and older people can come together. That's one of the big divides as we still have in our society, is that the views of young people about older people and vice versa. That's huge.
So, and those are concrete solutions, right? Like people want to hear that. They want to know, okay, that they've heard the building momentum metaphor, and so they know their opportunities, and they want them to be opportunities. And then all the things that you just said are the types of things that you should follow up that part of the message with, and say, because it was in that video that we saw where the people had that, they were getting there with the solutions, thinking they weren't necessarily saying concrete solutions because they didn't know what they were yet. But one of the gentlemen did say, and it's not in the video, I read this article about intergenerational communities where you have older people that work in daycares. So, that the thinking, the building the momentum metaphor got him there, where it reminded him of a solution that he thought was really cool. So yeah, we want to push people in that direction.
Hello.
Hello.
Ooh, that's really loud. Hello, everybody. The level of research that you've done this is at the public perception. I just wanted to hear any comments about using the framing methodology, addressing decision makers, legislative committees, in other words, speaking your truth to the power.
So our focus and our sort of theory of change is that one of the ways that you move policy and policy makers is by, ensuring that the general population, the public, is better educated about a social issue, because they will push the people that they've elected, ideally. I'm not going to get into it, but they will ideally push the people that they've elected, the people in power, in the direction that they want. They'll make demands. But we've also found that when we create these communications, policymakers, legislators, et cetera, they have some different interests sometimes. They have to worry about how much money they have in their budgets and things like that. But they're very similar to the public in terms of how they think about different social issues because they're not experts on social issues. They're everyday people in many ways, just like the public. So we've actually found that a lot of our messages work just as well with policymakers and legislators. Not even just, sometimes it really turns on a light bulb for them because they think, now I can use those same frames in my speeches, et cetera, to my colleagues. So I personally, think that crafting a totally different set of frames for policymakers or legislators isn't really necessary as long as we're using them really strategically with them. And a lot of times they are both the audience and we can make them into users of the frames. So.
That kind of ties into the question that I have. The people who
I don't know where I'm, oh, there you are.
People who funded your work, AARP and all the others, are they going to get together to take your messages and have a unified message that they put out?
So they are working together right now to kind of frame everything similarly to the way that we recommended. These are all really big organizations and it takes time. And sometimes, sometimes it's not the communications part of an organization that brings us in and gets excited about us. It's their research or their policy group. So it takes time. What's a little different too is that they make grants to other grantees and then they tell us or tell their grantees, you all need to work together. And a lot of times that is actually how it works when we work with big funders. They might change their communications, but also they kind of push us out into the field for the people who they know are on the front lines. So.
Hi. So I noticed in the competency one, the most competent also aligned with the youngest associations age-wise, and I was wondering what work you guys did within that aging bracket around framing.
Do you mean what research we did within a specific age bracket?
Or just when we're looking at, right, if people are associating the most competent with the youngest of the older adults, if you did any work about if framing as people got older changed at all, or if it was all kind of the same.
I guess I'm not quite sure what you're asking. I'm sorry.
So I saw that you had 54 was the most competent, and then
let me go back so we can talk about it with looking at it. That will probably. Oh wait, I went too far. Apparently, I want to show you guys this video again. Okay, I kind of want to watch it again, but okay, let's open this one up. Okay.
So if you looked at how do we frame when we're talking about someone who's 75, who's not even on the associations in terms of competency level. If there's different framing, that we have to talk about the older of the older adults than the younger older adults.
I don't think that you don't necessarily need to use different framing for different sets of groups. I mean, we were looking at aging as a process that is continuous, right? So when we did this research, we were thinking about when different organizations are talking about aging and about Americans getting older in general, which words seem to have the least create the least negative implications for members of the public. We didn't look at what specific words should we talk about for people who are 75 and over. I'd say generally what you do is you use older person, and then you might talk about people who are 75, but I wouldn't use a different term to describe them, if that makes sense.
I think part of my question was also about if there's a way of changing our level of associated competency with those older adults, right? So if we are talking about most competent and we associate it with younger, older adults, what
So,
then?
so are you worried that like if you're using older person, say 75, does that just?
Or just how do we frame someone being 75 as still competent, right? Like if we're associating most competent with someone who's 64 younger, and you have someone who's 75.
Okay, awesome. So I don't think it's just that you rely on the word older person necessarily, but you talk about, again, those really positive ways of framing somebody who's who's 75 or older as they have accumulated wisdom, they have ways that they can contribute to society, and then offer those specific ways that they're going to contribute to society, and make it, a very positive story about how even, at 75, you're still building momentum. You build momentum until the end, right? So thinking, it's a more creative way of using it than just doing a very high level, like we're all building momentum no matter how old we are. But I think a lot of times, especially as we talk about adults that are getting, much older, we fall back into that. They have very special needs. They create a very negative lens around them in our communications, and we need to think about how we can pull those apart and just frame it as a much more positive story.
Question back here. I'm curious, do you actually educate journalists, the media, television? I actually was the director of a foundation that focuses on energy, and particularly for the vulnerable population. And we found if we could tell them a crisis story, they would flock to the door. If we provided them really positive things, we would get far less coverage. It seems that what's covered in the media tends to be the crises, the disaster, et cetera.
Yeah, so the media does like to chase the saddest, worst story, absolutely. So we are a 501c3, so we work with nonprofits, not with for-profit organizations. That being said, some journalists have kind of found out about us and come to us. Documentarians have found out about us and come to us. And we have been able to shape, actually I have another video, I should have brought it, where you can see the building momentum metaphor actually built into a short, like 3-minute video that I think it was an advertisement for a service organization. But I would love it if we could get more people onto our frames, journalists, members of the media, but it's usually other nonprofit organizations. And it can be, I think the role of the advocates, our role is to help all of you talk more effectively, right? And then the role of the advocates and the people who work in this world is to, in all of their communications, including the communications with journalists, is use good framing. Because eventually we can, if everybody's doing it together, push people away from that really bad negative framing and towards more positive framing. And so, you can do that through op-eds, or also we've trained experts in various topics to, we call it spokesperson training. So whenever they talk to a reporter, they use good framing.
So how do we take this down to the individual level? Because that's where social change happens. And I'm a person who's out there working with these older persons, and they have become that implicit bias. They believe that is who they are. And how do I even change their perspective of themselves when they believe they are no longer competent, that they're not a productive person of society? What do I use to help them change their frame of themselves to believe that even though they have been very sick, because unfortunately those are the folks that I work with, how do I change their frame to believe that they can still contribute, that this isn't really, that implicit bias isn't what they are?
So I'll say a couple things. So one is that we know that these frames do work across the swath of different ages, because we tested them, with demographically representative, especially in the survey experiment groups. So I think it ended up being 12,000 Americans that we tested these messages with overall. So I will say also, though, so I think that it can work, I think, with people who are older, although, and facing difficult circumstances. That being said, the things that we create are high-level communication strategies for organizations and advocates at kind of a higher level. So, it's a little hard for me to say, for this one individual, this is how you should specifically talk about it. But I think that these frames can work, and I'm sure that there are some challenges every day to figuring out, okay, how can I be a positive person when I'm working with people who maybe are facing difficult circumstances? So that's a great question, and I wish I had a little bit of a better answer. But I think it's thinking strategically, and how can we use these frames not just in something we're writing, but in something that we're saying out loud. And Thanksgiving is coming up. I'm sure there's going to be lots of opportunities for all of us to be at a Thanksgiving table and maybe talking to somebody who doesn't understand things the way we do or believe the things we do. And I try and think about this before every Thanksgiving. What can I say that might help, maybe that uncle or whatever that just doesn't agree with us come around to my way of thinking, or at least get closer. So as I said, that last quote said, it's not about arguing well, it's about speaking differently, right? So.
So I'm not sure if this is a question, but just sort of an observation as I'm getting older, is that I think and use your language, the framing that we use a lot of time is comparing people to what you did before. So the people we admire are the ones that run a marathon or go into the Peace Corps. And I'm wondering if we need like a different model of what it means, or what we have permission to do to still be considered meaningful, or that we can compliment or pat somebody on the back that, oh wow, you're great, you're doing just like you did when you were 40 or 50, and maybe that's not what we need to be doing. So anyways, just stuff I ponder. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think you hit on something that is somewhat generally problematic in the way we tell stories in America, and probably really in Western culture, which is that we focus on heroic individuals. And we saw that in our research, right? So there's that one person who's aging well because they're amazing and they ate right and they exercised right, and yeah, they're running a marathon at 70 and they did it all by themselves, which we know they didn't do it all by themselves, right? Like we live in a society where there are collective things that we all do together, and holding up that individual who magically did everything great by themselves is a really toxic narrative. And what we recommend is not that you never tell an individual story, because they do bring people in sometimes, but to make sure you always frame your stories about individuals with context. Right? So you could tell the story about the person who's running the marathon, but you need to explain how they got there. And you need to also explain why that's maybe not possible for everybody, but there are other amazing things and opportunities that people who are 70 are bringing to their lives and the lives of everyone who lives around them. So it's again, that wide angle lens. And I could do a whole nother talk just on how we tell stories, but it was too much to shove into this presentation. But yeah, that's a great question. It kind of hits the nail on the head in terms of what we face every day when we're trying to make social change.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we've run out of time.
Thank you.